Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to an EverQuest lore video. We do find that in the EverQuest canon, within the EverQuest history, the scriptures that record the history of Norath, we do find that the gods, from time to time, do intervene in mortal affairs, particularly if one of their creations are harmed in any way, or they're blasphemed to some degree or threatened. That the deluge that befell the inhabitants of Cazic, similar events happen throughout the history of Norath. But so far we've covered the Age of Scale and the Elder Age. Now let's take a look at the Age of Monuments. This portion is entitled Unwanted Attention. Innoruuk, the Prince of Hate, cursed his fellow gods for not including him in their pact and vowed they would regret such disrespect. Now Innoruuk, he's a very emu god, and we're going to look into him next. I just want to read this section of the history before we delve into Innoruuk himself. He took the first elven king and queen and slowly tore them apart physically and mentally over the course of 300 years. He then rebuilt them into his own dark, sadistic image. These dark elven creatures came to be known as the Tyr-Dal. So the Tyr-Dal are the dark elves. And as described, Innoruuk created that race out of the mutilation and degradation and torture of the elven king and queen over the course of centuries. Now, human beings don't have a lifespan as long as centuries, but it wasn't necessary for Innoruuk to utilize any magic to extend their lifelines. Elves live for centuries naturally, and so all he had to do was preserve their life to enable him to continue to torture them, and they would have had to reproduce in some form to create the first Tyr-Dal children. Now the elves are known as the Firdal with an F, and the dark elves are known as the Tyr-Dal with a T. Moving on, Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane and Cazic came next to Norath. So now we have two additional deities who are another wave of gods who have discovered what Vishan has done, and we're going to see how they respond. Well, first let me say this. I will say Bristlebane, he is a neutral god if I haven't already said that. Cazic is definitely on the side of order or evil. We're going to go over these deities in a minute, but Cazic is the god of fear. And Ralozek is the warlord, the god of war, who is not necessarily on the side of chaos, not necessarily an evil deity, but closer to that side of the spectrum than order or good side. And we're going to see that Ralozek causes a lot of dissension among the inhabitants of Norath and causes a lot of friction among his fellow gods from his actions. But let's continue and we'll get to that point. From this pact, Brel added the gnomes. So Brel gets into a pact with a new pact now. He had already had a pact with Tunair and Prixis and also Ralos, but now he's entering into a second pact. Now Ralos has already been in one of the pacts. He's already created the giants. He forms a second pact with Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane, Cazic and Brel. So continuing on. From this pact, Brel added the gnomes, cousins to dwarves, yet more wiry, gnarled, and consumed by tinkering with devices. Rallo-Zek made the ogres, so here's his second creation. Massive, implaceable beings of questionable intelligence. And the Oryx, bred for battle and single-minded in their desire for conquest. So that's the third creation of his. All right, so we have the giants, the ogres, and the Oryx are creations of the warlord Rallo-Zek. And we already covered all of the creations of Brel, who Brel is, the description of Brel. And let's continue on and see what else happens in this particular era of Norathian history, known as the Age of Monuments. On the surface, away from elves and giants, Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane fashioned the halflings, a short and stubby folk who were nonetheless agile and had a distinct propensity to meddle or even pilfer at times. So a lot of rogues across Norath align themselves, feel a kinship, feel very related to the ways of the god Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane. And so he creates his first creation on Norath, the halflings. Cazic, Lord of Fear, was drawn to the swamps and jungles of Norath, and there created the green-skinned trolls and the reptilian Ixar of Canark. So you'll see in a lot of these regions, like the Emerald Jungle, for example, like the Swamp of No Hope, Innoruuk Swamp, these regions have a very huge influence that is generated from the god Cazic. And we'll take a look at the notes of the author of this journal on the side of the page. He has depictions or doodles of Bristlebane, Rallo-Zek, and at the bottom is Solosek Road, but we'll wait till we get to talk about the elves or the Elven Age when we will discuss Solosek Road and his role in Norath. But this concludes the portion pertaining to the Age of Monuments. So now let's briefly cover the background of the deities introduced in the Age of Monuments. Let's first take a look at Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane. Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane is a god in the EverQuest franchise. He is known as the King of Thieves and is the god of mischief. In terms of the recorded history, Bristlebane discovered the world of Norath around the same time as Cazic, Tunair, Prixis, Brel, and of course Vishan had already populated the world with their creations. He was drawn to the thickets of Norath, and that is where he created the halflings of the world, a short, stocky race of people with an affinity to nature and a love of mischief. So the halflings are very popular among EverQuest players. Typically, people like to make halfling rangers, druids, and rogues in particular. Well, there are some popular other choices such as cleric and paladin for the halflings. And they're a very interesting group of people known to have hairy feet. That was always something that always bothered me about that race, but once you get some pixels for your feet, some shoes, you're pretty a-okay. But continuing on, followers of Bristlebane, those who claim Bristlebane as their god are all about having fun above all other things. Bards and rogues, the most common devotees, but there are a great many gypsies that worship him as well, and we come across many different gypsies, different gypsy camps throughout Norath, such as in the Karanas, as well as in the Oasis of Mar, in the deserts of Ro. And so gypsies are very common throughout Norath in open zones. Mischief is encouraged heavily among the King of Thieves followers. While other religions focus on honor, fear, or peace, these clever and witty tricksters have rituals consisting of practical jokes. So a lot of pranksters. Followers of other gods may sometimes find these mischief makers annoying, but very few of them have evil intentions. As I said, Bristlebane's more of a neutral deity. even though they rob people and steal their stuff. During the Age of Turmoil, we haven't got to that age yet, the most devout followers of Bristlebane are the halflings of Rivervale, where a chapel has been erected in honor of the King of Thieves. And you can definitely visit that chapel in his honor in Rivervale, and many of you who are watching this video more than likely have, whether you are aware of it or not. In terms of his appearance, in Norathian art, Bristlebane is depicted in many different ways. Sometimes as a halfling, sometimes as a court jester, sometimes as a singing bard. He is known to take various forms and often use illusions in his trickery. Now me, I love the illusions of EverQuest, and that's another video in itself more than likely, but illusions are very popular among the class known as enchanters. They have various different illusions that they can utilize to circumnavigate the planet of Norath and avoid conflict and trick other races into thinking they're a race other than what they are. Unfortunately, the way the game is designed, strangers, complete strangers, NPCs that you come across for the first time, they already know what deity you worship, if any at all, and that will affect whether or not they would attack you on sight or not. He is known to take various forms and often use illusions in his trickery. Also, I forgot to mention that bards and rogues get access to different masks throughout Norath, such as the Dark Elf Illusion Mask in Lower Guck, or the Erudite Illusion Mask in Howling Stones. There's a Barbarian Flayed Mask that allows you to turn into a Barbarian. So there are Bard and Rogue only usable masks that have clicky illusions that allow you to transform into different races, which is pretty neat. When adventurers discovered the Plane of Mischief, that happened, I believe, in the Vilius expansion. When adventurers discovered the Plane of Mischief in the Temple of Vishan during the Age of Turmoil, none may know his true form. He's a raid mob in that expansion. But a very important thing to note, when a god is killed in their plane of existence, in their plane of power, quote unquote, no pun intended, they are not dead. You cannot kill a god in their own plane of power. There is only one plane in which you can kill a god permanently, where they're vulnerable and can be harmed and can cease to exist. Now another god will come into an existence to fill the void of the attribute that that god represents. For example, Cazic is killed in the Norathian canon, and there was an attempt to replace him, but we'll get into that lore. That's a pretty deep lore right there. Also Ralozek. And so other forces can replace them. Like the whole House of Thule expansion is all predicated upon Cazic Thule's children assisting another entity in trying to overtake and claim the power of Cazic Thule himself, who we actually defeat. But the only plane that the gods can be harmed is a plane known as the Plane of Time. And on the Plane of Time is where the gods are truly threatened, and we will get into that, because that is the basis between the distinction between EverQuest 1 and EverQuest 2, or where the timelines diverge. So among the Pantheon, Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane makes his home in the Plane of Mischief. He has no true enemies or allies, but is considered mostly as a good-natured god. I mean, I would probably disagree with him not having any allies or enemies. I think that he is definitely allied with Cerulus to some extent. But anyway, that's all on the god Fizztlethorpe Bristlebane. Let us move on to the next deity presented in the writings of this traveler, Cazic Thule.